Hey, what's up guys? Welcome to MST.TV. In today's Market Watch episode, we are going to be reviewing some of the more notable price trends and changes that we've seen from the market over the last week or so. Over the weekend, we just had the Luxury Gaming Championship Series give us our first real taste of what this upcoming meta is going to look like, and it revealed to us some meta trends and techs that top players are looking at using this format, and then even outside of those top tier decks, there are still players exploring various rogue decks and strategies that have the potential to flourish after that massive ban list that we just received. So today we're going to be breaking down some of those more notable price trends that you guys will want to know about so that you can make the most informed decisions possible when you are buying, selling, or trading your cards. Let's get started. So the first card that we'll review here is Forbidden Droplet, a card that has been steadily increasing in price ever since its release. This card is an extremely powerful card because of its flexibility and its versatility. You can use it to shut off cards like Borreload Savage Dragon or Red Eyes Dark Dragoon, but you can also use it during the damage step to get rid of problematic huge monsters. With all of the emphasis on setting up unbreakable boards, this card can help to ensure that you have a chance to play the game when you're going second, very similarly to Dark Ruler No More. Of course, this card being a quick play spell is huge because it means that you can chain it to your opponent's cards, forcing them to pay costs and interrupting their thought processes. Even if you are going first, the card isn't dead because you can set it and then flip it up during your opponent's turn. Now, for whatever reason, this card didn't have a great showing at the LCS this weekend, seeing hardly any play amongst the top decks, though I'm not 100% sure why. It could be the fact that people don't like that you have to give up other resources as cost, which can be annoying in certain game states. But there's also the fact that with Herald of the Arclight still running around on people's end boards, it prevents you from sending monsters from your hand to the graveyard to pay costs, so it can be a little bit difficult to play around in that regard. That being said, I am definitely expecting droplets to consequently drop in price over the next couple of weeks. Not by a huge amount, but by a tiny bit to maybe around the $80 to $85 mark. Its future from there really depends on how much play this card sees moving forward, and if it continues to be excluded from the decks of top players at events, or if it finds its way back into the meta. Either way, with no reprint expected until the 2021 Megatins, expect this card to still continue to be one of the most expensive and sought after cards in the game because of its incredible potential. Next up is Triple Tactics Talent, a card that has fluctuated quite a bit in price since its initial release. At first it was extremely hyped up, and then it kind of fell off as people thought that maybe the card just wouldn't be as good as people were expecting, and then people realized that it was actually really good, and it started to trend back up again. Well, now the card has gone up in price yet again, back to roughly where it started at on its initial release, at around $100 a piece. At the LCS, 6 out of the top 16 deck lists used this card, and it was actually played by both players that made the finals. The card has become really important in allowing people to draw into additional resources and extenders after being hand trapped, hopefully allowing you to combo off. But it can also be used to steal cards like Red Eyes Dark Dragoon and potentially turn around a game completely, or rip a key card out of your opponent's hand so that they are unable to play after trying to hand trap you. Much like Forbidden Droplet, this is a card that I'm expecting to stay relatively high in value for the foreseeable future, since it probably isn't going to be reprinted until the 2021 Megatins. Throughout that time, this card will of course see varying amounts of play depending on the format, but given the price point that it's at now, I wouldn't expect it to drop too far. I actually think that this card is going to continue to be a staple moving forward, where if you want to play competitive Yu-Gi-Oh, it's kind of a card that you have to own. Given how hand traps are still extremely important and prevalent in the game of Yu-Gi-Oh, this card can help to capitalize on that to punish your opponents. I'm expecting this card to increase in price very slowly and steadily over the next few months, because I think that people are just going to realize how strong this card is. It's one of those cards where the potential benefits that you get from potentially resolving it outweighs those few times where the card is going to be dead because your opponent has no interactions at all. I think that this card will be very similar to Lightning Storm and slowly increase in price towards and then settle at around the $120 mark. The next card we're going to take a look at here is Droll and Lockbird, which is a card that I kind of found surprising. Droll hasn't been a popular option for a little while, but now we are seeing it not only in the side deck, but some people's main decks from the LCS top cut as well. It does make a lot of sense. Droll is extremely effective against Dragon Link and Dogmatica Invoked, and also has some utility against Infernobles and Dinosaurs as well. Because of how viable it is, we have seen a small bump up in the prices of Droll and Lockbird all across the board. For the Ultimate Rares as the highest rarity, we are now looking at over $90 a piece. For the Ultras and the Supers, the two Holos, we're seeing a price of $10 to $12 each. And then for the lowest rarities, we're seeing $7 for the original rare prints and $3 for the structure deck commons, which is still a fair amount. Now, to be fair, these prices aren't horrible. I think a big factor here is the fact that Droll is due to be reprinted in Maximum Gold, which comes out in November, though that is going to be an alternate art version. And that is only a month and a half away, right? Which isn't too big of a deal, given that we don't really have big events at the moment. That being said, if you really want to bling out your deck and pick up the ulties, you can go ahead. I feel like the reprint isn't really going to affect the price of the Ultimate Rare. With the rest, it's kind of up to you and kind of depends on how nice the alternate art gold rare will look. If they look like how the gold rares looked before, maybe they aren't that great, but if they look like those really cool textured ones that they have in the OCG, that would be really awesome. So if those reprints are nicer, then maybe these lower rarity versions will tank in price, right? But if the reprint is really ugly, then maybe the Supers or the Ultras retain a little bit more in terms of value. Either way, I actually think that Droll is a card that I would try to stay away from holding too many copies of. It's one of those cards that cycles in and out of formats depending on the meta. So whatever rarity you decide you want to have for yourself to play with, I would keep that set for your own use, right? But then start the process of moving your extra copies while the card is starting to see more and more meta play the way it is now, because you'll be able to rebuy them if you really want to in a few months after it rotates out of the format. The next card is one that I'm personally really fond of, and it is Ice Dragon's Prison. This is a trap card that lets you steal a monster out of your opponent's graveyard and then potentially banish a face-up monster from each player's field that has the same type. This card is extremely valuable because at one point, it allows you to get rid of 2 of your opponent's resources, right? For instance, against Dragon Link, you could banish a key dragon from their graveyard as well as a Romulus on their field, and that's 2 potential extenders that you've removed from the game. Alternatively, you could get rid of Isolde as well as something like Renault against the Infernoble deck. It's certainly a really strong card against combo decks this format, the main 2 being Dragon Link and Infernoble Knights. This card wasn't a side deck staple or anything like that, but it was played in the first place Dogmatica Invoked list as well as the top 16 Subterror list in those decks that are looking to go first and establish those disruptions to make it hard for your opponent to combo off. It is a really strong option that can end your opponent's turn single-handedly. People are definitely taking note of this card, as it was $8 not too long ago, but is now up to $12 a piece, with relatively few quantities available on the market. If you're looking to play one of those slower, more control-oriented decks this format, Ice Dragon's Prison is definitely a card that I would consider picking up sooner rather than later if you can grab them at around the $10 mark, because they definitely have the potential to increase to $15 or maybe even $20 if it starts to become a side deck staple, or if we see a gradual shift towards the more control-oriented decks this format. Artifact Lancia is another card that saw an increase in side deck play at the LCS, and it's pretty easy to see why. Lancia is a very strong card against Invoked, Dinosaurs, and Eldritch, and then also has some limited applications against Infernobles and Dragon Link, though I don't know how eager I would be to side it in for those matchups compared to the other options available. It is definitely a card that you will want to consider and have available for yourself to use. Fortunately, it does have a number of common printings, so accessibility isn't really an issue. It was also reprinted in Dual Devastator as an ultra rare, so you do have that very easily accessible holo version if you want to bling out your deck at least a little bit. However, the rarity that has jumped up in price considerably is the secret rare from Battles of Legend Heroes Revenge, which despite being only $2 to $3 for the longest time, is now an $8 secret rare card. To be fair, the secret rares do look really nice. I have some German and Italian secret rares for myself, and the secret rare foiling on Lancia looks absolutely amazing. That being said, whatever rarity you want to play is probably fine. If you want to bling it out with the secret rares, then go ahead. It's not like they're going to be reprinting this card in any sort of higher rarity like Ghost Rare or anything like that. It could be an ultimate rare, but not really that likely. But if not, you do have those cheaper options available. The main point here is that if you have these secret rares and you don't really care for the card or how they look, now is a great time to sell your extra copies at this hyped up price while the card is seeing some pretty solid meta play. So Dragoonity Phalanx is a card that I want to talk about briefly because it's a card that spiked up in price kind of out of nowhere, If you've played against Dragon Link, you know that a standard part of their combo is to search for Lance off of Romulus, and then use the Lance to summon out Phalanx from the deck, so that you now have a tuner that you can make Halki Fibrax with. Well, I didn't realize it, but Phalanx is actually a card that has fairly limited printings, and so all versions of the card are somewhat expensive. The DT versions being the most expensive should be no surprise, as the card is now $35 a piece, but this is something that we see fairly often with old DT cards that suddenly become relevant out of nowhere. However, for the secret rares from Hidden Arsenal, you're looking at $13 each, and then even for the reprint from Legendary Collection Kaiba, ultra rares you're looking at $7 a piece. This is a lot considering that Phalanx is just a one-of in the deck. I think it was very easy to overlook this card because I thought that Phalanx was reprinted as a common in the Dragoonity structure deck, but apparently not. Anyways, if you want to play Dragon Link, this is a card that you'll probably have to pick up because it is a really important part of the combo. It probably won't be reprinted until we get the Dragoonity structure deck sometime next year, by which time Dragon Link might not even be a part of the meta anymore. But even if you do want to play the deck, please just look at buying the ultra rare, maybe the secret if you have a friend who has some old Hidden Arsenal bulk and doesn't mind moving you this card for cheap. This is just a Garnet in the deck, and I personally am really not a big fan of spending a ton of money to bling out those bricks that only get run at one and never see play again outside of that specific application. On the other hand, if you opened a ton of Kaiba collection and there's a chance that you have a few of these cards sitting around in your bulk, now is a great time to dig them out and move them while there is a demand for them, because Dragon Link is definitely looking like one of the most popular meta decks this format. Next up, number 93 Utopiakaiser is a card that isn't necessarily seeing meta play at the moment, but it's definitely a card that I would keep an eye on moving forward. With Rusty Bardiche back in the game, this opens up a ton of interesting combos, and one very notable one is accessing Phantom Knight's rank up magic with Bardiche while using Utopiakaiser to bring out various number monsters that you could rank up. The first one that comes to my mind is using number 11 Big Eye to summon Kali Yuga, which can be a very devastating card to stare down whenever it hits the field. With the Master Rule change earlier this year and the unbanning of Bardiche, Utopiakaiser has always been a card to keep an eye on, and I believe it did spike in price earlier this year when the Master Rule changes were first announced, but it never really managed to do anything. At the moment, secret rare Utopiakaisers are about $9 each, which isn't too expensive. Remember though that outside of the prize card version, this secret rare from Battles of Legend Heroes Revenge is the only printing that's available, so the moment that we start to see any sort of play or competitive success or usage from this card, expect it to jump up in price right away. The quantities of this card available on TCG Player are also very little, so it could spike in price very quickly. Nevertheless, this isn't a card that I would try and buy a ton of copies of, right? Because it is a little bit more situational, and we do need to see it do something before we'll really see that demand that would lead to actual sales rates. That being said, I would say it's a fairly safe hold if you are already holding onto a few copies, and if you can pick them up for around $5 in cash or maybe $7 in trades, it's not a bad card to use to round off some transactions. Thestalos the Mega Monarch is a card that is kind of random, but I guess is probably one that we all should have seen coming the moment that Pantheism went to 3 on the ban list. Obviously with Pantheism at 3, Monarchs are basically back at full power, but unfortunately 2020 Yu-Gi-Oh! And 2015 Yu-Gi-Oh! Are very different things, and the Monarch deck just can't keep up with the meta anymore. Of course, that isn't stopping some people from trying out an older, fairly popular deck and trying to cheese out wins by setting up the domain lock and something like the Monarch's Erupt. Now we have seen jumps in the price of a number of various other Monarch cards such as Super Domains and Super Primes, but Mega Thestalos is the most recent jump that we've noted. It actually has an effect that's very similar to Smoke Grenade of the Thief, where you get to look at your opponent's hand and then discard a card from there, which is pretty cool. And that being said, Thestalos only has the 2 printings, the original secret rare from Primal Origin, and then another secret rare print from the Megatins of that year. Because it has such limited printings, we are looking at roughly $20 for either version of the card, which is definitely more than I would be willing to pay for this card. As I'm sure I've mentioned before, I don't think that Monarchs are going to be doing anything in terms of impacting the meta, So I don't know why you would want to spend $20 on a brick in a deck that already has more bricks than Paul George in the NBA playoffs. I think we will definitely see Mega Thestalos cool off in price pretty quickly, and even then, it's probably already on Konami's reprint radar, and we'll see it in a March reprint set similar to Dual Overload, where it will be worth $1 or so at most after. Definitely a card that you should be actively looking to move as soon as possible. And to round off the video here, I want to quickly talk about the Ghost Rare Winged Dragon of Ra, which is a card that I've seen so much conversation about recently. So this is the first Ghost Rare that we've seen in a really long time, and initially people were talking about how this card was going to be comparable to 10,000 Dragon, where it was easily going to be at least $1,000 for a single copy. As we've seen, however, Ra has actually kind of gone completely the other way, and after being $800 or so on release, it quickly fell to $500, and it's actually now under the $300 mark at $290 a piece. This is a really sharp decline, especially for something that people were so eager to finally have the ability to get their hands on. I think that this drop in price is largely due to the pull ratios, right? Where you're generally getting one in almost every single case that you open. So when you pull it relatively easily, the price naturally just kind of drops. That being said, of course, this is easily one of the most collectible cards that we've gotten in a while, and I would argue that it has the potential to surpass a good chunk of the Starlight rares in the long term, despite being much easier to pull. I think that as soon as we get Slifer and Obelisk as Ghost Rares and the whole trio is available, we should definitely expect Ghost Rare Ra to jump up in price like crazy, because there is finally going to be a ton of people who want to collect sets of them. Now that being said, that is an extremely long-term plan. I think that we should expect to see Ra continue to sit at approximately the $300 mark, maybe even potentially decline a bit to $250 in the extremely short term, just as people eagerly open more and more product to try and pull it because of the hype, and people are also just now receiving their pre-orders and they're opening the boxes to hopefully recoup whatever value they can. However, if you can afford to hold on to this card for a few years, I think it's only a matter of time before this card eventually rebounds and surpasses the $500 mark, maybe even higher than that, as one of the most iconic and collectible cards in the game of Yu-Gi-Oh! Alright guys, that is it for today's episode. It was really cool to have a somewhat big event in this LCS because it gave us an idea of what to expect in terms of what decks are meta and what cards are important this format. Obviously, it's just the one event, right? So we can't say that anything has necessarily been solved, but it's definitely helpful to see what some of the top players in the game are thinking, even though maybe all of us don't play the best deck of the format, right? Those decks do help us to identify what cards we should be running in our own strategies to counter them, which in turn affects the overall market. Anyways guys, if you did enjoy today's Market Watch episode and you want to see more just like it, please make sure that you hit the thumbs up button for me and let me know. Also make sure you leave a comment in the comment section down below. Let me know what else is going on with the market that maybe I didn't cover, so I can hopefully cover it in a future episode to keep all of you guys as informed as possible. And of course, if you want to continue to see more market watches like this, as well as all of the other great content that both Tombox and I bring to the channel here, make sure that you hit the subscribe button as well. And yeah, so until next time guys, don't forget to hold on to your MST.TV.